The morning Daisy arrived at Forrester Creations, the world seemed to tilt ever so slightly off its axis, just enough for everything that had once felt certain to blur. The young woman's entrance was quiet, almost unassuming, yet it carried the weight of something seismic. Her steps were steady, her eyes unwavering, her expression neither hostile nor pleading. She walked into the lobby of one of Los Angeles's most powerful fashion houses holding a slim envelope that contained the secret capable of shattering the foundations of two families. No one knew her, yet something about her presence commanded attention, as if she belonged to the very air that the Forresters breathed, as if some invisible thread had been guiding her toward this confrontation her entire life. Inside the executive suite, life went on as usual. Brooke Logan was preparing for a photo shoot, radiant and composed as always, the living embodiment of beauty and control. Eric Forrester was in a meeting about the next couture collection, his tone calm but decisive. Rich moved through the halls with his usual intensity, unaware that by sunset, the world he thought he understood would collapse beneath him. When Daisy's name was first announced, Brooke barely looked up. Another model, perhaps, or an ambitious intern hoping to get noticed. But when the girl entered, silence fell. The air in the room changed, heavy with a kind of recognition that had no reason to exist, yet could not be denied. Daisy looked at Brooke with eyes that mirrored her own, a haunting reflection of the past taking form before her. It was Eric who spoke first, his voice hesitant. "Can we help you?" The young woman met his gaze, her tone composed but trembling at its edges. "Yes," she said, holding out the envelope. "My name is Daisy, and I believe I'm your daughter." The room froze. Brooke's hand slipped from the table, her pulse hammering in her ears. For a second, she couldn't breathe. Her mind rebelled against the words, tried to dismiss them as delusion, but something inside her, some buried, trembling truth, told her that this moment had been coming for years. Eric's face paled, his confusion genuine, but his silence betrayed a flicker of memory. Ridge, watching them both, felt an old familiar nausea rise, the same feeling that had haunted him every time a new secret surfaced between his parents, every time Brooke's name became entangled in another scandal. "What are you talking about?" he demanded, his voice cutting through the stunned quiet. "That's impossible." But Daisy was prepared. From the envelope, she drew a birth certificate, medical records, and a DNA report, documents that left no room for speculation. Eric Forrester and Brooke Logan were listed as her biological parents. The test had been conducted discreetly, using archived medical samples from a Forrester charity event months earlier. Every line of data, every seal of authenticity, screamed legitimacy. The truth was undeniable. The silence that followed was unbearable. Brooke's knees buckled, and she sank into a chair, her eyes wide and wet. She wanted to speak, to explain, but words dissolved on her tongue. The room seemed to spin around her as memories came rushing back, a night long ago, buried beneath layers of guilt and denial, a night that had never been meant to happen. It had been after one of her many breakups with Ridge, during a period of despair when she had turned to Eric for comfort. He had been kind, understanding, too understanding. One mistake, one night blurred by grief and loneliness, had become a secret she swore she would take to her grave. When she discovered she was pregnant, she had told no one. Out of fear, out of shame, out of love for the man she was still trying to win back. She had arranged everything in silence, the medical visits under a false name, the birth in another state, the adoption handled by trusted intermediaries. She had believed the baby would have a better life away from her chaos, away from the endless entanglements of the Forrester world. But now, decades later, the past had returned, flesh and blood standing before her, demanding truth. Ridge's voice was the first to shatter the stillness. "Tell me this isn't true," he said, staring at Brooke, his voice a trembling mix of fury and disbelief. But her silence was its own confession. The look in her eyes, the collapse of her composure, it was all he needed to see. He turned away, hands clenched, the betrayal slicing through him like glass. Once again, The woman he loved had deceived him, and this time, the wound went beyond romance. This was family. This was blood. Eric stood frozen, his mind a storm of disbelief and guilt. Could it be? Had he truly fathered a child and never known? Every image of Brooke he had cherished, every memory of their love, their years together, was suddenly redefined. He felt the sting of guilt not because of what he'd done, but because of what he hadn't done. He hadn't been there for this child, hadn't given her a name, a life, a family. Daisy stood silent, watching the man who was her father grapple with a truth he didn't ask for. When Brooke finally spoke, her voice was barely more than a whisper. "I thought I was doing what was best. I was scared. Ridge had left me. Everything was falling apart. I couldn't bring another scandal into this family." The room erupted. Ridge's laughter was bitter, hollow. "Another scandal? That's your justification? You stole a life, Brooke. You let a child grow up without her parents because you were afraid of bad press." Brooke tried to reach him, tears streaming down her face, but he recoiled as if her touch were poison. "Don't," he said, his voice low and broken. "You lied to everyone, to me, to Eric, to her." He turned toward Daisy, his expression softening for a moment. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "You didn't deserve this." But Daisy's face was unreadable. "I didn't come here for apologies," she said. "I came here for truth. I've spent my life wondering why I was never enough to be claimed. Now I just want to know what that silence was worth to you." The words hit Brooke harder than any accusation Ridge could deliver. She wanted to tell Daisy that she had thought of her every day, that guilt had gnawed at her like a shadow, but she knew that no explanation could undo years of abandonment. Daisy wasn't just her daughter, she was the living embodiment of Brooke's greatest shame. As the news spread, Forrester Creations became a fortress of whispers. Employees spoke in hushed tones, gossip columns feasted on speculation, and the company's image, already fragile after past scandals, teetered on the edge of collapse. Steffi, learning of the revelation, felt both pity and vindication. She had always accused Brooke of tearing families apart. Now she believed the universe had delivered its reckoning. Eric, meanwhile, withdrew from public life. The revelation had shaken him to the core. He spent long nights in his study, surrounded by sketches and memories, staring at photographs of the family he had built, and realizing how incomplete it had been. When Daisy finally agreed to meet him privately, the encounter was awkward, heavy with decades of missed moments. Eric tried to speak of love, of responsibility, but Daisy interrupted him with quiet dignity. "You don't owe me explanations," she said. "You didn't even know I existed. But now that you do, I just want honesty. Not grand gestures, not guilt, just truth." Ridge, however, couldn't find peace. His anger toward Brooke metastasized into something colder, darker. It wasn't just about betrayal anymore, it was about identity. For years, he had believed his life was defined by the Forrester legacy, but now that legacy was tainted by deceit. Brooke's choices had upended everything, the moral lines, the family structure, even the boundaries of love. Every time he looked at her, he saw not the woman he adored, but the one who had destroyed his trust once again. Hope and the other Logan sisters struggled to process the revelation. For them, Daisy's arrival was both a shock and a strange kind of relief, proof that their mother's flaws were human, not malicious. Hope, in particular, saw in Daisy's eyes something familiar, the loneliness of growing up under Brooke's shadow, craving the kind of unconditional love Brooke was never quite able to give. As weeks passed, the family dynamics shifted dramatically. Daisy, though wary, began to spend time at Forrester Creations, her sharp mind and quiet confidence earning respect from designers and executives alike. Eric found himself drawn to her artistic sensibilities, the way she saw design not as vanity, but as storytelling. For the first time, he saw in her the same spark that had once defined Brooke in her youth. But that realization brought as much pain as joy. Because every moment he spent with Daisy reminded him of the years he could never reclaim. Brooke's world, once defined by glamour and admiration, crumbled. She found herself alone in her mansion, haunted by memories and regret. The mirror became her enemy. Every reflection was a reminder of the choices that had carved her life into fragments. She tried to reach out to Ridge, to explain again, but his silence was final. The man who had once forgiven her countless sins had finally reached his limit. In the midst of the chaos, it was Daisy who became the unexpected center of gravity. Despite her pain, she showed a strength that unsettled and inspired everyone around her. She refused to exploit her new identity for fame or power. Instead, she used it to build bridges where others saw only ruins. She reached out to Hope, to Eric, even to Steffi, not as rivals, but as people bound by the same fractured history. Slowly, the storm began to calm. Eric, in time, began to heal. His bond with Daisy deepened, not as compensation but as genuine connection. They spent hours in the design room, sketching together, sharing ideas. For him, Daisy became a reminder that life, no matter how fractured, could still produce beauty. Brooke watched from afar, torn between gratitude and heartbreak. She knew she had lost Ridge for good, but in Daisy's eyes, she saw a chance for redemption, a chance to give love where she had once given only fear. By the end of that year, the Forrester mansion no longer felt cursed by secrets, but marked by survival. The truth had scorched them all, but from the ashes came a fragile honesty. Ridge, though still distant, began to soften when he saw Daisy's influence on his father. The peace she brought back into a house long divided by ego and betrayal. Brooke, for her part, accepted her punishment quietly, devoting herself to repairing what little she could. And Daisy, the daughter born of secrecy and silence, became the quiet heart of both families. She never sought revenge, only truth. And in the end, she became what neither the Logans nor the Forresters could ever quite manage to be on their own, a bridge between worlds. Yet even as forgiveness began to take root, one question lingered like an unhealed wound, not whether the truth had set them free, but whether it had been worth the cost. For in revealing Daisy, the universe had forced everyone to face the one truth they had spent their lives avoiding, that love, no matter how beautiful, always comes with a price, and some debts take a lifetime to pay. Ridge's decision came on a quiet afternoon, the kind of day when sunlight spills through the tall windows of the Forrester mansion as if unaware of the pain it illuminates. The house was silent, though it had never felt emptier. Brooke sat on the edge of the sofa, her hands trembling against the fabric of her dress, watching Ridge as he stood near the fireplace, distant, rigid, his eyes unreadable. The man who had once fought the world for her now looked like a stranger. He spoke softly, but each word carried finality. He told her he could no longer live with the weight of deception, that every time he looked at her, he saw not the woman he had loved but the lies she had built their life upon. Brooke tried to plead, her voice cracking under the weight of her own remorse. She reminded him of their history, the years of love, forgiveness, and rebuilding. But Ridge didn't flinch. "There's a difference between mistakes and patterns," he said, his tone low and trembling. "And this wasn't a mistake. This was a choice." Then he walked away, leaving Brooke in the silence of her own making. That night, Brooke sat alone in the living room, the ticking of the clock like a heartbeat mocking her. She thought of the night Daisy had been conceived, the shame, the secrecy, and the endless years of pretending it never happened. She had always believed she could bury the past, that love would protect her from the truth. Now love was gone, and truth was all that remained. Her tears fell silently, but there was no one left to wipe them away. Ridge's departure marked not just the end of a marriage, but the dismantling of the identity she had fought so hard to preserve, the image of Brooke Logan, forever desired, forever forgiven. Ridge, meanwhile, found no peace in leaving. The mansion he retreated to, a quiet property on the outskirts of the city, felt cold, sterile. He surrounded himself with sketches and designs, trying to lose himself in creation, but every line he drew seemed haunted by Brooke's face. Despite his anger, Part of him still loved her, and that made the betrayal even harder to bear. Eric tried to reach out, urging him not to turn away from the family entirely, but Ridge's pride had calcified into something immovable. To him, Brooke had crossed the final line, not only betraying his trust, but forcing him to confront the ugly truth that the family he had built was a house of mirrors, beautiful but false. While Ridge withdrew into isolation, Daisy began to step into the spotlight. What had started as a revelation now became a storm of ambition. At first, she claimed she wanted nothing but acknowledgement, to be seen as a daughter, not an interloper. But the longer she spent inside Forrester Creations, the more she began to see the cracks in its empire. The favoritism, the arrogance, the obsession with legacy that excluded anyone who didn't share the Forrester name by birth or marriage. For someone who had grown up outside that world, struggling for every opportunity, it was infuriating. She began to realize that the very people who had shunned her mother in the past were now judging her with the same contempt. The whispers from employees, the sidelong glances, the polite but cold smiles, all of it ignited something dangerous inside her. Eric, blinded by guilt and paternal affection, gave Daisy increasing access to company meetings and creative discussions. She was sharp, intuitive, with a natural eye for design that stunned the staff. But behind her quiet demeanor, she was studying everything: who held power, where the loyalties lay, and which weaknesses could be exploited. When she learned that Ridge had walked out and that Brooke was collapsing emotionally, Daisy sensed opportunity. Forrester Creations was vulnerable. For the first time, she had leverage, and she intended to use it. Her first step was subtle. She approached the family lawyer, requesting copies of Eric's estate documents under the pretense of understanding her place in the family. What she found was shocking. Her name was not mentioned anywhere. Despite Eric's newfound affection, nothing about her inheritance had been legally recognized. That knowledge hardened her resolve. Daisy began to meet quietly with an outside legal team, one specializing in contested inheritances. Her argument would be simple yet devastating. She was Eric Forrester's biological daughter, with undeniable DNA evidence to prove it. She had been denied her rightful claim through deception orchestrated by Brooke, and now she would demand what was hers. Brooke was the first to sense the shift in Daisy's demeanor. The shy, uncertain young woman who had once trembled in her presence was gone. In her place stood someone colder, more assured, and far more dangerous. When Brooke confronted her, Daisy's calm frightened her more than any outburst could have. "You built your life by taking what wasn't yours," Daisy said softly. "Men, power, reputation. Now it's my turn." Brooke's heart pounded. She realized, too late, that Daisy wasn't seeking connection anymore. She was seeking justice or revenge, depending on how you looked at it. News of Daisy's legal action spread quickly. It hit the media before the family even had time to respond. Headlines screamed, "Secret Forrester daughter launches inheritance battle." The press dug into every corner of Brooke's past, dragging up old scandals, old lovers, old sins. The Logan name became toxic overnight. Hope, mortified, tried to defend her mother, but even she couldn't quiet the growing storm. Eric, overwhelmed by guilt, refused to condemn Daisy publicly. "She's my daughter," he said simply. "If she believes she's owed something, I can't deny her the right to fight for it." Ridge's fury reignited when he heard the news. "She's manipulating him," he told Steffi. "She's after everything we've built." But even as he spoke, he couldn't help wondering if Daisy's anger wasn't justified. Eric had abandoned her, even if unknowingly.
Brooke hat lied.
The lines between right and wrong blurred, leaving only chaos. The legal war that followed tore the family apart. Daisy's lawyers were relentless, armed with documents and testimony that painted Brooke as the architect of a decades-long cover-up. They portrayed Daisy as the innocent victim of elitism and deception, a young woman denied her heritage by the very people who claimed to value family above all else. Public sympathy swayed in her favor. Investors began to question the stability of Forrester Creations. The company's stocks wavered. Designers left for rival houses. Behind closed doors, Brooke unraveled. Her beauty, once her armor, now felt like a mask she could no longer bear. She stopped attending meetings, stopped returning calls, retreating into solitude. Hope tried to hold her together, but Brooke's shame was too deep. Every newspaper headline was a mirror reflecting the choices she could never undo. Ridge, meanwhile, refused to see her. Though late at night, he often found himself looking through old photographs, caught between anger and nostalgia. Eric aged visibly under the weight of it all. Torn between his love for Daisy and his loyalty to the family he had spent a lifetime building, he found himself paralyzed. When Daisy visited him one evening in his study, she found him staring at an old family portrait, Ridge, Thorne, Brooke, and all the grandchildren smiling beneath the Forrester crest. "You think this picture means something?" she asked quietly. "It's just an illusion. A perfect family that never existed." Eric looked up, his eyes filled with sorrow. "You're wrong," he said softly. "It existed, until all of us forgot what love meant." But Daisy was unmoved. Her mind was set. "Love doesn't pay debts," she said. "And you owe me, Father." When the court case finally began, the spectacle was unlike anything the fashion world had seen. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps, reporters jostled for angles, and every major network covered it like a royal scandal. Brooke sat through the proceedings like a ghost, her face pale and distant. Daisy's testimony was measured but devastating. She spoke of the loneliness of growing up unwanted, of searching for answers, of discovering that her mother had traded her existence for reputation. Each word struck like a dagger. Eric wept silently, unable to look at her. In the end, the court ruled that Daisy was entitled to a portion of Eric's estate, not enough to destroy Forrester Creations, but enough to make her a force within it. She had won not just recognition but power, and she wasted no time using it. Within weeks, she took over several divisions, bringing in her own team, reshaping the company's image with a vision that was as bold as it was ruthless. Her designs were daring, disruptive, fueled by the same anger that had driven her fight. Critics called her the storm that woke Forrester from its dream. Brooke watched it all unfold from the sidelines, too broken to fight back. Ridge remained distant, though part of him grudgingly respected Daisy's strength. She was, after all, her parents' daughter. Eric's brilliance fused with Brooke's cunning. The family had tried to bury her, and she had risen instead. Months later, Daisy stood alone in the design studio long after everyone had left, looking out over the Los Angeles skyline. She had everything she thought she wanted: power, recognition, revenge, but the victory felt hollow. The empire she now helped control was one built on lies and grief. Forrester Creations had survived, yes, but at what cost? Behind her, Eric's portrait hung on the wall, his painted eyes kind but tired. Daisy reached out to touch the frame, whispering softly, "You gave me your name, but I had to steal your legacy." And in that moment, she realized the truth her mother had learned too late, that no inheritance, no empire, no victory could ever fill the emptiness left by a love never given. But it was too late for regret. The dynasty had changed forever, and Daisy Forrester, the daughter once erased, now stood as its most formidable heir, carrying both the burden and the brilliance of the name that had nearly destroyed her.